The minivan is a vehicle that to many screams domesticity. It calls to mind images of suburbs, family life, and youth soccer teams. For much of its history, it has been praised for its practicality and yet maligned as so deeply uncool. Even Kevin Hart had something to say about the minivan in his comedy special, I'm a Grown Little Man.
If your husband or your boyfriend drives a minivan, leave him alone. Any man that drives a minivan does not care about life.
But the minivan once helped save Chrysler from total ruin in the 1980s. The unveiling of the first Chrysler minivans in 1984 is still considered a landmark moment in the history of the automotive industry. But the minivan is now relegated to a small portion of the automotive market, despite seeming like the sum of everything most people want in a car.
If you were to look at it from, say, an automaker's point of view, a product planning point of view, you would ask consumers, what do you want? And they would give you a list of things like roomy, spacious cargo, good fuel economy, and even sliding doors might come up in that. And what would it be? It would be a minivan, but nobody wants to buy one because they all want SUVs now. It's such an image problem, but my God, the moment someone drives one, they say, wow, this is really practical. I really like it.
Meanwhile, buyers scoop up sport utility vehicles and crossovers at an increasing rate, and automakers are faced with the choice of whether they ought to keep selling these multi-purpose vehicles or throw in the towel in favor of more popular and more profitable models. The origins of the minivan are, believe it or not, the subject of sometimes fierce debate. Some would say the first minivan was the Volkswagen Bus, which the German automaker began selling in the 1960s. Others may point to even earlier examples, such as the Stout Scarab, a car from the 1930s. But the minivan, as customers typically know it, is traced back to the 1984 model year, when Chrysler rolled out its Dodge Caravan and Plymouth Voyager models. The story is that Lee Iacocca, who had previously been famous for shepherding the Ford Mustang into existence, had left Ford for Chrysler in the early 1980s. At the time, Chrysler was struggling. Just a few years earlier, Congress approved the Chrysler Loan Guarantee Act of 1979, securing $1.5 billion for the automaker. Chrysler needed a hit. And it got one. Under Iacocca's leadership, Chrysler developed the K-Car platform, a kind of simple skeleton which the company used as the base for a wide range of cars. This is common practice in the auto industry, but this particular platform was so adaptable it allowed Chrysler to simplify product development and cut costs to an unprecedented degree. It was a major turn for the company. And its first minivans were one of the many vehicles Chrysler built on this platform. Iacocca had been part of a team at Ford that had been working on a small family van concept to compete with station wagons, which were quite popular at that time. When Iacocca decamped to Chrysler, he took the idea of the minivan with him, and the Caravan and Voyager models were released soon after.
This is one of the most important new concepts in American family motoring to come along in decades. The Chrysler Corporation's new T-Wagons, the Plymouth Voyager, and the Dodge Caravan.
The idea was to combine the spaciousness and practicality of a cargo van with the driving dynamics of a car. It could take sharp turns and fit into a conventional garage. The generous interior space was made possible by the front-wheel drive powertrain on Chrysler's K platform. The van went on sale in January of 1984, and by the middle of the month, Chrysler's truck sales were already soaring 160% over the same period in the previous year.
Dodge Caravan, one vehicle that takes the place of an economy car, sporty car, station wagon, and van. Dodge Caravan is a transportation revolution.
Other automakers rushed to get in on the action. Toyota repurposed one of its vans for the US market, and Detroit competitors Ford and General Motors released their own smaller vans in the years that followed to lure away customers. For better or worse, the minivan became a kind of cultural icon, a symbol of the suburbs in much the same way the station wagon had once epitomized American family life.
It really became the replacement for the station wagon and for what families, prior to that took as a as a vehicle of choice for whether they were moving around the city and, doing sporting events or what have you to vacations. So it quickly became the vehicle of choice for families.
Minivans grew from about 4% of new car sales in the early 1990s to a peak of around 7% in the early 2000s. But they fell from there, and automakers who once scrambled to catch up to Chrysler's hit vehicle began dropping out of the race. Car buyers today won't see a single sliding door on a car-based vehicle from either Ford or GM. Besides Fiat Chrysler, the only other automakers selling minivans to Americans are Asian manufacturers. Toyota has the Sienna, Honda sells the Odyssey, and Kia makes the Sedona. In 2018, Fiat Chrysler led the segment. The Dodge Caravan sold 151,927 units, up 21% from the previous year. The Chrysler Pacifica held steady, selling 118,322 units. Honda's Odyssey took third place with about 106,000 in sales, a 6% increase over the previous year. But both the Toyota Sienna and Kia Sedona dropped more than 20% in sales, selling roughly 88,000 and 18,000 units respectively.
That whole view of the soccer mom mobile really affected the image of the minivan. It became such an icon for families that anyone that was starting a family, who didn't want to be seen as the the stereotypical American family, was looking for something else. Enter the SUV.
In raw numbers, the true family car has for a long time been the sport utility vehicle and its car-like cousin, the crossover. Whereas the total minivan segment accounted for only about 3% of new vehicle sales in 2018, compact, midsize, and large SUVs were a combined 35% of the market that same year. But these vehicles are not just hurting minivan sales, and they are arguably doing more damage to other segments, such as sedans. Crossovers, SUVs, and pickup trucks make up almost 70% of the car market today. They have been climbing in sales since the early 2000s, just as the minivan was beginning to peak. So with the pendulum swinging wildly towards sport utility vehicles, what kind of future does the minivan have? Could there be a revival? Probably not, say industry watchers. The minivan's problem is that it is often seen as unfashionable as it is practical, and its practicality may be the root of its problem. The boxy shape, the sliding door, and the sometimes surprisingly high gas mileage might be useful, but to many buyers, they seem the automotive equivalent of orthopedic shoes. Crossovers and sport utilities are arguably less practical, but they convey sportiness and a rugged lifestyle many people aspire to.
The SUV's winning because it was seen as sportier, right? It even has the word sport in its name for SUV, but it doesn't lend itself as much to a people mover in the same manner, which kind of lets you steer away from that, I'm not say soccer mom, I use that term, but at the same time, it's really the default one that everyone goes with. But it's odd because it's the most practical. Other than a large truck, a minivan's gonna get you basically everything you need.
However, there still seems to be a large enough slice of minivan buyers that encourage a few brands to stay in the game. In 2016, Chrysler unveiled its Pacifica model, an update to the minivan it had pioneered 4 decades earlier. It was a considerable change from the town and country minivan that had come before it. Chrysler marketed the Pacifica as a sleeker, more refined vehicle than its predecessor and competitors. Customers can still opt for luxury features such as leather seats and an appearance package that blacks out the entire vehicle, giving it an almost intimidating look. Honda was the first to offer a built-in vacuum cleaner, and competitors have followed suit. But despite these innovations, the minivan's best chance at a future in the US might be in fleets. Fleet sales for rentals, taxi cabs, and ride-sharing companies already make up a considerable portion of sales.
If we fast forward a little bit further into the future and we start to get into autonomy and ride-sharing, that can be an interesting play for a box on wheels kind of design where you can do a lot with that interior, especially if you don't have a driver and you're using that space, whether it's workspace, potentially sleep space, kitchen on wheels, party on wheels, whatever it might be. I think there's a lot of options that potentially could see that shape come back.
Notably, Google's autonomous driving project, Waymo, gave the Pacifica one of its biggest single lifts in years when it ordered 62,000 of the minivans for its own planned fleet of self-driving vehicles. Ultimately, there is only so much automakers can do to spruce up the humble hauler's image. Change the minivan too much, and it ceases to be a minivan. Instead, it becomes just another crossover.